To explore the personal stories that make these strange topics so enthralling for folks tired of living in what seems a disposable, disenchanted universe, this is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Almost all of what we cover on this show emerges through the personal experiences and narrative of folks who brush up against the extraordinary. Those stories reflect the deep, transformative power of strangeness. Confronted with circumstance and power beyond what we've been taught should exist, experiencers transcend tired limits and evolve. Their worldviews shift. The universe rejects the static definitions and cold limits of accepted logic and forces a confrontation with the unknown. They recognize all at once and irrefutably that all they've been taught and told about the nature of reality is as much fairy tale as anything imagined by the Brothers Grimm, Mother Goose, or Walt Disney. It's a humbling and a homecoming, a rekindling of deep connection, and for the few folks who gain this perspective, it's transformational. Edson Freeman, author of the new book Strange Light, Personal Accounts of UFOs, NDEs, and Other Enduring Mysteries, recognizes the power in these personal experiences. His collection is filled with people who've dangled over that ragged edge and found truth in their confrontations with mystery. Freeman, through this volume, is helping the rest of us capture these transformative energies and realize that evolution in our own lives. By being a witness to such magic, we invite magic into our own lives. Stories as a vector for ascendance. Welcome, Edson.
Thank you so much for having me.
Did I get all that right? Was there anything I need to correct, or was that okay?
Yeah, no, your your intros are always fantastic, so I appreciate
Well,
you.
well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Your book's fantastic. I, like you, have been captivated by this subject, and the road to how we get there is always a colorful story of, kind of strange epiphanies and synchronicities and all those sorts of things. And I want to get into all that. But before we go there, I'd like to sort of just, you have this book, and this is part of your rolling out of that book. Let's talk about what you were hoping to accomplish in the writing of it and how you feel like you've done after, I'm sure, were hundreds of hours of labor to bring this thing to fruition.
Yeah, so I really was struck by a couple books by experiencers. They resonated with me. I'm relatively new to these topics. I was interested as a kid in UFOs and stuff, but I kind of set it all aside and said, "Oh, that's not real," for most of my adulthood. But various things brought me back around, and I read so Chris Bledsoe's book and Robin Lasseter's book, Earth: A Love Story. Those were two
And
stories that really.
Chris is
Oh, go
UFO
ahead.
of God. Sorry, just wanted to throw that
Yeah,
out there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and they both really kind of stuck with me. These tellings of these experiences, and I think what made them work was setting aside these questions of trying to prove something. It was more a story of just this is what happened to me, take it or leave it. And so this book was sort of an exploration of that approach, where I wanted to try to, there's plenty of people out there that are doing the the debunking or the documenting or the cross referencing of all the different aspects of this. I just wanted to listen to people and hear their stories. And I envisioned the book initially as sort of a collection of short stories, like a fiction collection, but nonfiction. So
Yeah.
each chapter in the book is one person's experiences,
Mhm.
just told, with me acting as the storyteller. And I was really mindful of the fact that these are very personal stories, very intimate stories, and I wanted to be careful with them. I didn't want to put something out unless the person who the story belongs to was happy and satisfied with the end result. So I was really careful to let them review it and tell me what to tweak or anonymize certain details or whatever made them comfortable with putting this story out into the world, because it can be kind of a big deal.
Yeah. It's interesting, one of the things that it's like each of these events is something revolutionary or informative in the person's life who has these experiences. And but when you take a sort of a macro view of all of them, there's been some talk by folks, some of the deep thinkers in the field, that all of this is kind of a way for whatever the phenomenon is to communicate with us. Like the language of the phenomenon are these experiences, and we have to kind of try and um, collate them, but also be affected by them, and recognize each one of them as being potentially full of meaning for all of us. I wonder what you think about that idea, having collected all of these stories. Did you get any sense of, I don't know, I mean, obviously it's a big question, but any sense of collective meaning or some kind of point that was trying to get made through stories and stories like this that have happened to not just people in your book, but everywhere, always for human history?
Right, right. Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I definitely got the sense that there's some through lines between, because the book, I talked to people with all different types of experiences. I tried to go
Yeah.
wide, both in terms of the contact modality aspect, but also the geographic aspect, the cultural aspect, um, and it's it's interesting because there are some. They do all kind of feel like they're from the same family. These
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what to make of that. It's one of the things that I kind of was trying to explore with this book,
Hmm.
with doing these interviews to try and find out what does it mean. I'm coming away from this experience with more questions than I had when I started, I think.
Of
So,
course, that's what
um,
happens, man.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as you
yeah,
know
and
now, I mean, it's just like this limitless, and that's part of what we're doing here. It's like, I think the unsettling of our confidence in terms of what we know, whether that's the message or not, that is a direct impact of engaging with this material. It's just like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, there's just so much
right,
happening, and it kind of takes away your ability to look at the world as a defined external thing. It's a living thing that's complicated, and there's all these,
right, and
appendages that come out of it.
right, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I remember somebody somewhere along this journey saying, all the rabbit holes are connected. You go down this UFO rabbit hole or this paranormal rabbit hole or precognition or whatever, and they all seem to be somehow linked together. Um, but it's it's a fascinating exploration to talk to people with all these different experiences and find that they may be using different words, but they're talking about similar things, right?
Yeah,
They may,
yeah,
one culture it may be, uh, fairies, and another culture it may be sky people, and another culture it may be gray aliens. Maybe those are all the same. Maybe they're not.
yeah,
Um, and there's definitely that dreamlike quality sometimes where different people, even different people seeing the same experience, end up seeing it differently or experiencing it differently. Um, so yeah, that's I don't know what to make of that either, but
yeah,
it definitely seems to be part of the nature of it, and whether that's sort of by design or that's just the nature of whatever is trying to come through. I'm
yeah,
not sure, but
yeah. I think that, to get at the meaning of these stories, it's like for each individual person, I think the meanings probably vary according to what their own biography is. And the only way to really get at what that particular event's full import might be is to analyze it in the course of each person's its life. So like having a collection of stories like yours is useful to be able to look at the broad swath of phenomenon that's occurring, but like also there's that's like a broad look. And then there's also, I think we need deep narrow looks where we're looking at how one person's life ultimately, I think that would be a useful, I mean, not, it's kind of an aside in this interview, but I mean, look how that event affected that person's life and the course of their life and how it fits within the context of all that. Sort of like Robin, provided in her book. And it just gives you a sense of how it relates to everything that's going on in that person's life, how it pushes kind of that transformation that seems to be reported by so many folks. There's just so many ways to go about studying this phenomenon, and they're all like, as much as there's been a lot of copy written, it's also all been relatively unexplored deeply. I think that that's just the field is just now opening up for that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And one of the things that I was trying to do with this was I wanted it to be more than just stories around the campfire that,
Yeah.
have that spooky vibe or whatever. I wanted to look at how does it affect people? Like
And you
what
did
is the
that.
impact
Yeah.
on their lives? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought you were very sensitive about the stories. And I imagine that like getting invested with that kind of access to someone's life, and for a lot of these folks, that becomes the most, important event that they've gone through, or at least one of them. And to handle that and to turn it into a written document takes a lot of trust. And I'm sure that you have to earn that and treat it like a sacred kind of text. And I think to keep the people that you're interviewing engaged and to make sure that they walk away satisfied is an honorable way to go about it. So I think you're to be applauded for that. A lot of people, I think, try to mine those experiences to exploit it, and I definitely didn't get the sense from what I read that you were um, doing that at all. You were very much trying to treat it in the manner in which it impacted the people who reported to you. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was the idea. And I did work with a lot of like I wanted to be really careful. Like you said, you have to build trust if you're going to get somebody to share a story with you like this because there's so much stigma that people have lived with their whole life. They've had this story, but they don't know who they can tell it to and who they can't. And so, one for me to establish enough trust that they can, you know, share their story with me, knowing that I'm going to share it with others. Um, that's a big responsibility. But then also um, to try to kind of take their story and treat it in a way that honors them and their experience, even if it doesn't make sense to somebody else reading it. I'm sort of the buffer then.
yeah,
They're putting themselves out there through my book rather than directly. And so if people come at me and say this book is garbage, this is all made up, whatever, that's directed more at me than it is at them. So that felt
yeah,
like a good way for people to be able to share their stories with a little more safety and a little more, like I said earlier, to give them as much or as little anonymity as they were comfortable with. Um,
yeah,
and there were people that decided, you know, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for my story to be out for one reason or another, and that was perfectly okay. Like I don't. There's always more stories. There's so many people out there with these stories. So
yeah. How did you find them? How did you go about collecting, the names of folks who had had this experience and then build those relationships?
there were a lot of different avenues that I went down. One that was pretty successful was just reaching out to um, people that I knew, like friends,
Mm-hmm.
and say, "Hey, do you know anyone who has these experiences?" And I had a couple people in particular who sent me all kinds of like, how there's certain people that just know a lot of people and
Yeah,
are trusted by a lot of people, and they were like, "You should talk to this guy, and you should talk to this person, and these people over here." And so some of them were that way. Some of them were me reaching out to someone who maybe posted their story on Reddit or TikTok or wherever, and
yeah,
saying, "Hey, would you be interested in talking to me?" Sometimes it was word of mouth. People found out I was doing this project um, through the Experiencer group, which is something that J. Christopher King and some others had put together. I met one or two people that way. So it was just sort of a whole range of different ways of connecting with people. And then I tried not to be like, okay, tell me your story. It's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah.
find out if this makes sense or not. And, build that trust and all that. And yeah, so I'm pretty happy with the number of people that were willing to trust me with their story to make this happen.
Yeah. What do you, in terms of your own story and how you got into this topic? You mentioned that you've only been into it for a little while. I wonder what your sort of, life experience was before, and then what was the triggering event that kind of opened you up? Because if you're not into this is a kind of a weird space. But then once you get into it, I mean, it's like a, like you said, a little bit of a tar baby, and also a rabbit hole in all kinds of directions. So, what brought you to it?
Yeah, so I think up until around 2017 when the New York Times article hit, it was just sort of background, like, oh, who knows? Maybe, maybe it's real. Maybe people watch too much X Files. I don't know. But then when that came along, I was like, okay, so there's something to this, maybe. And then when David Grush came out, it was like, okay, maybe I should take a look at this a little closer, this whole UFO question. And what I found was I quickly got bored with the nuts and bolts and the, you know, videos that you can't, you know,
Like make
experts are going
out?
frame by frame through. I
Yeah.
was like, hey, we're never going to figure these out. This is
Yeah.
uh, too contentious and too difficult. I'm sure there are somewhere in the vaults of our military industrial complex. There's some amazing videos that we're never going to see.
Yeah.
Um, but the consciousness aspect of it, or the woo aspect of it, as some people like to say, was so much more interesting to me. It was so much more um, human than just like, oh, there's some weird thing flying in our skies, and that sort of started to draw me into reading different people's accounts. And as I look back at my own experiences, I was like, I had some pretty weird things happen to me that at the time I just sort of brushed off. But looking back, there's synchronicity and then there's synchronicity. It's like
Yeah.
coincidence is a term we throw around a lot, but when they get to a certain point, it's like that seems like that's beyond just a random chance. So that was sort of that whole constellation of things sort of got me into this. And since I started talking to people, I've started almost seeking out some of these experiences, going out skywatching with people, or, going to places that are reportedly haunted or things like that. And I've had some experiences, doing that, but still nothing on the scale of, any of the people in the book.
Synchronicities are often considered like I don't know, the introductory level course to some of this stuff. And I've definitely, talked on the show about when I was a kid, I had an experience where my dad had died, and he was in the hospital, so I knew that he was ill. But I felt like I needed to go home. I went home, and I was in the school day, and all of a sudden I'm like, I need to go home. I need to go home. And I went home, and as soon as I got home, the phone rings from the hospital saying, your dad has just died. And so I was there with my mom when she got the news, and it was like I felt drawn. Like I don't know why I wanted to go home, but I really had a strong compulsion to do so. And the timing was just so perfect that I was there for my mom to grieve in that moment. And but even through that experience, I was like, oh, that was weird. But it never really connected. But now that I've gone into the subject, I've tried to kind of go through my life and find those episodes that, like you said, seem to be freighted with a lot more meaning in terms of the timing of the events and all of that. Um,
And
but it's
yeah, and
good.
it does seem to, I was going to say, it seems to be tied to big events, not 100% of the time, but it seems to correlate with different types of trauma or
Yes. In fact, that was
big
the question I
emotional
was going to have.
experiences.
Yeah, in the book, I mean, like people who someone's died and all of a sudden these events kick off, or someone gets married and all these events sort of kick off. There's like always this kind of energy where there's a break with the past or some painful experience, which says something about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know if we are tapping into something when our emotional state is elevated, or if something is sort of reaching out to us when that happens, or it's hard to pin down what the nature of that is, but that definitely seemed to be a recurring theme as I talked to more and more people. It was like, yeah, there's a trauma connection, or a liminal time period connection to these episodes or these experiences.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I mean, I don't want you to give too many spoilers away for the book, but is there any way you could give our sense of viewers of a couple of the stories that are there and featured there so that people might be enticed into taking the leap and getting the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any that stood out to you that make sense for this format, I mean, I can dive into any of them.
Yeah, I mean, just whichever ones you want to think would
Okay.
help draw people. I mean, I'm a broad spectrum show, so
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I think the very
the
first chapter.
well, the one about the uh, his um, his son died, and then he was raising his child. I forget the names, but and
Uh,
then
yeah,
there was a lot of sort of synchronistic things in the custody battle that led to like the right circumstances happening, and then he was having dreams with a sibling that were sort of synchronistic and conveying the same sort of message. I thought that was powerful.
right. Yeah, yeah. So that was one of my neighbors actually lives around the corner from me.
Yeah,
His name is Devin, um, and I was getting toward the end of working on the book, and I was trying to find some different types of stories. And so we have a neighborhood email list, like a lot of places do. And I was
yeah.
like, hey, does anybody know of, maybe somebody that works in hospice care or as a nurse or something that has experiences, unexplained experiences around people transitioning from life to death. And one of my neighbors was like, I do, I have this experience that so he told me the story of his son, his adult son, who died tragically. Um, his son was working for a company that did like gutter cleaning and roof clear offs and stuff, and he had fallen off a ladder and died. And just at that moment, um, Devin, the person who is my neighbor, um, heard his son's voice just cry out for him
Yeah.
and had no idea that something had happened. But it turned out that that was pretty much lined up exactly with the moment that he fell to his death. Um,
Which sort of
and
reminded me of my experience with my father because of the sort of like the simultaneous weird sort of echoes through reality that like people who are close to the person who's passed all of a sudden kind of get you know, a tap on the shoulder in some weird way.
right, yeah, yeah, and the story goes on to where Devin started. So when when Devin went to um, see his son's body for the last time. He had fallen and been badly injured. Obviously he died. So they had the body covered up. But Devin asked if they could just uncover his foot so he could say goodbye to him, and he was like massaging his son's foot, and that was sort of the tie that came back later, recurring theme of Devin would feel someone massaging his foot at key moments. And obviously losing an adult son is a huge um, emotional, uh, just awful
Can't
thing to have
imagine.
happen.
Yeah, I can't imagine, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and he had a grandson who survived the Devin's son died, but um, the grandson was still around, and Devin suddenly had this infant to take care of, and he was worried about his age becoming a problem as the child grew up and everything. And so there were just a series of synchronicities and um, you know things falling into place just in the right way for the custody situation to get worked out. Where um, uh, so Devin's son, I'm going to give these people names because it's easier to talk about. Devin's son
Yeah,
is Gabe.
yeah.
Um, Devin's grandson is Isaiah. So Gabe was who passed away. Isaiah was who they were trying to find, the right circumstance for. And Gabe's brother was who ended up taking custody. His brother and the brother's wife ended up caring for the child, basically adopting him. But that was only possible because of a whole series of, um, there was a court case, a custody battle with another grandparent, and I mean it's a whole story, but without certain pieces of the puzzle being in the right place at the right time, it may have turned out completely differently.
I mean, it seems like it was, I mean, some from beyond the grave, certain documents were produced that like seemed to prove points that needed to get made in court, and
Right, right.
it was a really powerful story, and it was just, you know, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that one gave me chills hearing it and then retelling it, and yeah, that's one that really sticks with you. Yeah.
yes. I mean, that's one example of a sort of a tragedy thing. And I remember, I think it was, I got the Morgan story was also one full of tragedy and sort of, can you maybe talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, so Morgan, you're picking the people that are closest to me. Morgan's somebody
Oh,
I've known for like 30 years or more. And she had a lifetime, she and her whole family have a lifetime of interesting sort of coincidences and um, experiences, and they manifest in different ways. But her father, for example, he was sort of, she compares him to Forrest Gump because at 19 years old, he joined the military and was asked to drive a general somewhere, and ended up at, the Birmingham bombings in the midst of the civil rights upheaval in the 60s. He was at the I Have a Dream speech. He also went to Vietnam and missed dying in combat multiple times because he just either was in the right place at the right time, got transferred to a different unit. Um, there was one case where there was a truck that broke down up the hill in a combat zone. They told him to go fix the truck and bring it back, not realizing that the hill had been taken and there were all these enemy forces and casualties and all this stuff. He just went up there, got the truck, brought it back like it was no big deal. And then her children, they have, so Morgan talks about one of her children who, as a maybe 18-month-old, like a maybe even younger, um, really off the charts in terms of developmental milestones and intelligence and things. And Morgan would be driving home thinking about what she was going to make for dinner, and she would think to herself, "Oh, I think I'll make hot dogs." And from the back seat, her daughter would be like, "I want mine with ketchup." Even without any words being spoken, she knew mom was thinking about hot dogs and
something's
she wanted
going.
ketchup on
Yeah.
hers. Yeah. Um, but yeah, and then there were all these like there were two friends when Morgan was in college who died in a tragedy, and at the funeral for the first of the two friends, during in the middle of the service, there was a light that popped, made a loud pop, and smoke came out in the middle of the service, and Morgan interpreted that as her friend sort of sending a little sign. And then they went to the second funeral, and the same thing happened again, where another light popped, but it was a little smaller, and they were like thinking, "Oh well, he tried. He wasn't. He didn't quite have the same level of ability as his other friend who had passed, but he was still making his presence known." Um, and then yeah, she had a almost tragic car accident as a teenager. The car flipped into like a creek, and everybody was okay, but not okay. Like she got some traumatic brain injury, but nobody died from it. There was somebody who was sitting on her lap who broke their clavicle based on her head hitting. But her parents somehow knew something had happened without having any indicators that there was a problem. And Morgan's mom was like telling the husband, go find her, see what's going on. And he left, drove right to where the accident was, and just somehow knew where to go and when to go. And so they have a whole lot of these. Um, I don't know if it falls under telepathy or just knowing. when and where to be or not to be. But they seem to have this. Even Morgan's adopted child has picked up on this ability to uh, have this telepathic or nonverbal way of knowing things.
What would you say these stories are telling us? I mean, that's a kind of a broad question, but what do you think? What are you drawing? I guess is a better question. What do you get from learning these stories? And I mean, obviously, for myself, doing my show, it's all part of a journey. Like, I mean, I do the show because I like to, I do I interview for a living, so I feel like I have that. That's what I can do to help contribute to the conversation. But I'm also like trying to gain something for myself in terms of spiritual awareness or knowledge about the nature of things. Um, how does that work for you? What do you learn out of all this?
I think what I've gotten from it initially so far is a big dose of humility in terms of like we think we have it almost all figured out, right? We collectively as humans, we think we're so advanced and we've got just a few more little nooks and crannies of knowledge that we haven't quite figured out yet. And I think what I've taken away from this is that we don't know anything. Like we are way too confident or arrogant about our scientific achievements and our ability to understand what's going on in the world or in the universe at large. But there's a lot more that we just haven't, maybe it's things that we don't know how to measure. Maybe it's things that are coming from a place that we don't understand yet, or, uh, there's so many theoretical explanations out there. I try not to collapse it down into, I believe it's this one or that one. I'm just sort of letting it be what it is. And, over time, maybe I'll come to some better understanding of the spiritual or the esoteric nature of these experiences. But mostly it's taught me just to not try to grasp onto, uh, a particular answer and just let's see where this leads.
Yeah. I
Of
wonder
course, I
if
guess
like,
that's been going on for millennia. So
yeah, yeah. And I wonder like hearing these stories from folks and when they have them and they begin to kind of reinterpret their own lives and all the major events that may have occurred, it's like having something going through this opens something up to where you can begin to interpret your life as having more meaning than what's on the surface. Like there's some kind of not even necessarily purpose, but that there's a deeper level that maybe we can't typically grok and that our society has written off. And my hope is that books like yours and other projects that are kind of beginning to try and take some of the stigma away and have this conversation is that people can once again engage with a living universe, like that there's a haptic feedback kind of thing going on where it's not just an inert space that we occupy, but that we are all being led on some journey of growth. There is some arc to our lives, whether or not it's cosmic or interpersonal, it doesn't matter as much. It's just that you can engage in meaning finding, you know what I mean? And
right.
I think that we've gotten so, like you said, down the rabbit hole of we've got everything figured out. Once we, get this thing or the speed for our rockets or whatever the new technology is, then we're really going to be like that much closer to, being masters of the universe. And what we really know is, probably hardly enough to, fit on the head of a cosmic pen because the universe is so big, so old that there's no real chance that we've got all that much figured out.
That, and we've sort of backed ourselves into a corner in terms of sort of mainstream science, because if you deviate from the conventional narrative, you're gonna maybe get defunded or maybe get looked down
Yeah.
on or maybe get discredited, or like it's tough even for science to avoid that dogmatic, like you can't ask those questions because we've already dismissed those. And
Yeah.
that's a recent thing, I think. There's even cultures in today's world, but if you go back 100 years or 1,000 years, we didn't, like, we all sort of agreed that, yeah, there probably are some ghosts or spirits, or depending on the culture, you might give
Yeah.
them different names, cryptids, whatever. There was something else to the universe than just what we can put in a test tube and measure. But yeah, how do we get ourselves out of that corner from a scientific standpoint? There are researchers out there trying to
Yeah, for sure.
push on those boundaries a little bit, but yeah, they don't get the time of day sometimes. So
Yeah, people like Beatrice Villarreal with her recent study of the transients in the sky that seem to disappear under the shadow of the Earth. So they're reflective, probably. I mean, there's a lot of good science out there, but there's also a lot of stigma, and people are resistant to having their institutional worldviews. You know, the whole scientific revolutions, Kuhn's book or whatever. They don't want anything that threatens their tenure or their ability to, explain things away gets shunned. Another thing
yeah,
that I think
yeah,
that your book is useful for is the lessening of stigma. It's like even if these experiences aren't necessarily real in the way that we, some people think of as real, and I believe they are, but I'm just saying even if that were the case, there are experiences that people are having, and lots of people are having them, and so I think it would be better if we're all honest about what we go through as human beings on this planet and share that and kind of deal with it rather than try to shame people into staying quiet because it doesn't fit the broader paradigm, you know?
right.
Um, so
Yeah, and there's definitely, like, depending on which area of the phenomenon that you talk about, if it's UFOs, you're going to get that stigma of um, that's probably sort of magnified by certain uh, certain
yes,
government organizations,
yes,
right?
there's a plot
That are going to
there rather than
discredit
just
it, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then the same thing happens with, say, maybe near death experiences or past life memories, but from the religious side, where there's a religion aspect of this that's saying you don't want to be messing with demons, or that's not in the Bible, so we can't, or whatever. The different religions have their own different variations of this, but it feels dangerous to the status quo sometimes, and so the powers that be, I think, lean into that and say, yeah, you must be high, you must be crazy, you must be trying to get attention. And what if they're not? What if we just listen to the experiences and just let people share what happened to them? Because it, whether you believe them or not, it affects their life for
yes.
you know for a long time and in large ways. Let's let people have their truth, have their stories, without dismissing them or debunking them or all those things.
Yeah. And I mean, forego assuming that just because you live in one reality, every person on the planet is living in that exact same reality. There's kind of that
Right.
arrogance that goes on, and I think if we open our minds to things, then things fall into our experience that we didn't know were there. And it's interesting. We were talking before about the kind of broad swath of phenomenon that all seem to kind of rhyme in a way. Whether it's near-death experiences and alien abduction, or vice versa. There's all these things that seem to have um, things in common that are have been steadily reported since we've been keeping track of these things. And to me, I can't help but want to argue for the reality of these things. So I'm like, if we look at all those experiences and all these different phenomena and how they all kind of correspond to one another, they each reinforce the other's, reality to my mind. Like if people were getting abducted by UFOs and they were reporting things that were totally bizarre and outside the realm of human experience that no one had been through before, that might be one thing. But people are experiencing the same kinds of things, whether they're, encountering aliens, or they're crossing over into an NDE space, or they're taking DMT and losing themselves in uh, that realm. There's just these continual threads that keep showing up that seem to be like you were talking about contact modalities earlier. It's like there's this meta space, and in various ways it almost seems like it's reaching through and trying to say, hey, look, we're over here, but you guys have forgotten about us. And whether it's the UFOs or whatever the mode, it's all pointing to the same kind of reality. And to me,
Yeah,
they
and I
back
think
each other up.
that's something that struck me as I was getting toward the end of this project, was that if I look at all of these stories collectively that are in the book, or other people's stories, Generally they're not mutually exclusive. It's not like if chapter three's story is true, then chapter five's doesn't make any sense, or if chapter five story is true, then chapter nine must be made up because they contradict each other. Well, that doesn't happen for the most part. Like that's they can all exist in the same reality, or I don't know if reality is the right word, the same surreality or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
totally. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And the effect that each of these experiences has on people seems to be very similar. It kicks
right.
off, like I tried to mention in the beginning, a transformational process. And it can be really painful and it can be deeply unsettling. Their lives can disintegrate, but they end up on this evolutionary path that can, that basically changes everything. It's like each one represents some form of what they would call in the past, I guess, a spiritual awakening or a kind of epiphany. And if they're ready for it, then maybe it's smoother than if they're not, but it's the same journey, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times, you just hear maybe that sort of going back to that campfire thing where you tell this scary ghost story, and that's the end of it. Oh, that's scary. But this was more like you tell this creepy thing that happened, but then you talk to the person more, and you find out that, or maybe it's a traumatic thing that happened, or whatever. It's this seemingly unpleasant experience, but when they look back, they're like, I don't regret that it happened because I'm in a better place now with my life. Um, and that was a recurring theme of like, despite in some cases the negative aspects of these stories or these experiences, they wouldn't wish for that to happen,
Yeah.
but also they're in a place that seems more fulfilling, or they're more grounded, or whatever. And the other thing I noticed that sort of is dovetails with that is a lot of times these people that were talking to me were their own biggest skeptic. They're like, I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is how it felt to me, or this is what I saw, or I question whether that really happened or not. But when you take the whole picture and step back from it, it's like, you're more of a skeptic than I am at this point for what you've just told me, because that's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. One of the things, again, with stigma is that I think a lot of times people may have some experiences like this and they're ashamed to share them or they can only share them with certain people. Did you get any sense with the people that you were talking with that that talking with you was helpful or that telling the story somehow gave them agency in, that event in their life that they may not have had if they had just kept it personal and maybe internalized it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, the first chapter, Finn, he, his story was about, um well, it was about a lot of things, like these all are, but, he saw some incredible things when he went to try and see the Marfa lights, and, he was visited by some entities, at different points in his life after that, and he told me his story, and he was like, after I sent him the draft, he was so excited. He was like, "Can I share this with my mom? Can I share this with my bandmates? Like, they think I'm crazy, but like I was giving him that little ounce of credibility that made it feel um, more like something that you could share with other people, because sometimes that third party voice makes a difference.
Yeah.
Um, but every time I sent one of these stories out to the person who it was about, um, I would always be anxious about what their reaction would be, and it was always positive. It was always like, I feel so much better having put this out there, or you really captured the nuances of it, and I'm glad you were able to tell my story for me, or things like that. So yeah, definitely, it makes a big difference for people to, uh, there are people out there like your Chris Bledsoes or your Robin Lasseters who share their own story, and that's not for everybody. Like,
Yeah.
not everybody
Yeah.
wants to put themselves out there like that. So it was kind of a privilege to get to do that for people on their behalf. And I think in a lot of cases, it really was an important, sort of meaningful point for them to get their
Yeah.
story shared.
You're a good writer and you've done great research, it seems like. I mean, is there anything that you're thinking that might be a next step for your for your research or because hopefully you're going to keep working in this field.
Yeah, I've thought about um, trying to do like a volume two, basically, collect more stories. Um, it's, it's, I want to be careful if I do that though, because um, I don't want it to become just a repetitive machine that churns out stories. I want to try and capture those things that are adding to the conversation in ways that we haven't already covered. Um, so I'm definitely open to doing more of this. And it may be, I may be thinking it's harder than it is because um, so many of these stories are so unique. Like I'm worried about being repetitive, but I may not need to worry about that based on talking to people,
Yeah, because
because everybody seems to, like you said, they rhyme, but they're also unique. Like there's something, every person's experience, I don't want to say is tailored to them, but it's unique
it kind of
to
is. Yeah,
them.
I mean, it's like it's imprinted with whatever their circumstances are. And like I was trying to say earlier, to find the meaning of these experiences, I think it can really only be ever ascertained by looking at the full context of each experiencer's life and their thinking and all of that together. And it's like this profound, deep message that's so personal that we can all share in the wonder of it, but like for the real deep consequences and meaning behind it, I think that that's to each person to kind of ascertain for themselves, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's sort of this paradox of very extremely personal and very extremely universal at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that that's part of the message. I mean, I don't want to get political necessarily here, but we're living at a time that's obviously very fraught. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of, the people call it the meta crisis, which I've covered a little bit on the show. There's just like cascading problems in the world, socially, politically, economically, and sort of universalizing our point of view is something that I think is long overdue. And if we don't begin to kind of think that way and empathize in that way, I don't know how much longer we're going to be on this planet, frankly. It's kind of a
Yeah, it's
dark moment.
and there are these ongoing jokes and comments about the darkest timeline. um and there's part of me that's like, let's not tempt fate by asking
No,
if
yeah,
if
it
this
can
is the
always get
darkest.
worse.
It can always get worse, right?
It can always
um
get worse.
but if we can sort of uh become a little less, a little more humble about understanding the universe, and listen to each other more. I think those are both really good things to try and move us forward to something else.
Yeah. I believe you mentioned in the book that you have kids. I wonder if this, experience of researching this book, but also your broader interest. I also have kids, and how do you engage this with them? Do you? Is this like your business? For me, it's a little bit of dad's kind of freaky sideline, but a little bit also like I try to keep their minds more open than I would have if I wasn't interested in this stuff without pushing some kind of worldview, you know?
Right. Yeah, that sounds really similar to my approach. Like my kids range from 22 to 11, so they're old enough that I can be like, listen, I'm in my woo era here. You can you can listen to my stories or not, um,
Yeah.
and that's fine. You can believe or not. You can come to your own conclusions on. And it's a mixed bag. We've got 5 kids, so some
Yeah.
of them are like, oh, that's really interesting, and some of them are like, uh, I'm gonna go play
Whatever.
some more Minecraft or something. So
Yeah, totally. That's funny because my kids are between 10 and 25. So I have four kids of the same range, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, they think it's cool, but they're not necessarily going to run around proclaiming. Although one son of mine has recently gotten into the occult a little bit and pursuing kind of how that relates to this whole phenomenology. So maybe I'll have a partner in the family tree at some point.
yeah, and that occult, um, all these esoteric um, systems from all these different cultures that all sort of, it goes back to that same thing of like, you might be interpreting it through a different lens, but there's some commonalities between you know, I'm not going to try and name all the different weird esoteric belief systems that are out there, but
Yeah.
they rhyme too, it seems like.
Yeah, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, all of them. Platonic, whatever you want to call it, that's all part of it. It's
Yeah.
very much like the same threads, and a lot of it boils down to we're all really one, and perhaps this is a minded universe in some way or another.
Yeah.
And that's so fascinating to begin to consider. And um, I try to engage in that stuff without becoming a dogmatist myself, and figure out how I can use that to kind of further my own spiritual path. But I think that that's, again, just like the story is for each person to kind of figure out what they want to do with it. And we've had too much of people pushing one idea or another. Let's just remember that the question can remain open, and we can engage in this stuff and be wondrous without having to slap a hard definition on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, hold that paradox of like, maybe this is, maybe this is real. Maybe this is not real. Maybe this is meaningful. Maybe this is random. All of these aspects of the world that we live in, the broader universe that we live in, I don't know if we can understand the big picture. Um, I don't know. That's something that I've commented on before. That the biggest takeaway, in some ways, is just that phrase. I don't know. You know,
Well,
and that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Admitting that is a challenge for a lot of folks, especially today. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That humility
Right?
is
Yeah.
probably the most important lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be able to admit that we don't know everything is freeing in some ways.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you gotta balance it with, not believe every single thing that ever is told to you, or every single story that ever comes along. You get a sense when you're talking, especially like when I'm interviewing people for the book, you get a sense of sincerity. You get a sense of um, whether this is, like, I don't know, humans are good at sort of telling the difference between someone spinning a yarn and someone talking about what happened to them, even
Yeah.
if it makes no sense.
Well, and like you were saying before, people have, or we were saying the idea that people who go through these things end up affected, and you can that affection, you can see it or feel it in folks when they're telling their stories. It's like there's a certain presence that kind of comes in where they're obviously impacted by whatever happened, and I think that's really hard to fake. And if
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I
yeah. And I mean, it does seem like there are people who have more of these experiences, whether it's sort of that, in that alien abduction flavor, or the poltergeist flavor, or maybe those are two sides of the same coin. Near death experiences seem to spur more weird experiences. You hear about the hitchhiker effect, but there are people who go their whole life without experiencing any of these things. And that's part of it too. There are people who are like, if I've never experienced it, then it must be made up. And it's like, maybe not. I don't know. Let's not jump to conclusions.
yeah.
Um,
Let's not assume your reality is everyone's reality. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Again, I interviewed a guy once who was doing a lot of research on, okay, astrological charts, right? Like, and he found that people who were having lots of experiences were correlated with certain star charts, and people who were skeptical had different kinds of star charts, but they were similar across the board. And I used to be really skeptical of astrology. And then I've had some readings done that were not the newspaper horoscopes, but like deep, reviews of what the circumstances were at my birth and how that relates to my long-term growth. And it was shockingly like accurate to like a strange degree. And the same thing is true of my wife and even the dynamics of our relationship. So I think that there may be something about when we're born and the situation, the physical parameters of the universe that isn't necessarily causal for how we experience the universe, but maybe a reflection, some kind of fractal like resemblance. I don't know what you want to call it, but there's something perhaps about how the stars are aligned when we're born that reflects whether or not the experience we have on this planet is A, B, or C, you know? Um, and
Yeah, yeah,
it's taken a long time for me to be able to admit that publicly because, you know, astrology has so much stigma attached. But I've met some really good, astute friends, and we've had long discussions on it. And the information that's lined up to back it up is just too startling and consistent for me to continue to resist. So I guess I've
yeah,
been
yeah. And
converted.
you know, you hear a lot of people talk about this sort of the simulation theory where we're all living in, you know, the matrix or whatever.
Yeah,
And I feel like in some ways that's just a a different lens to put over things that people have thought all throughout history. You know, if you take a lot of religions, it's like you're living here to maybe prove your morality, you know, and then based on how you do in this life, then when you leave this life, you get reward or punishment or whatever.
yeah,
And that's sort of a simulation theory of its own, you know. It's and
yeah, it is.
you get into weird questions about free will and um, how synchronicities are a weird one that you know, if this happened and it signaled something to me meaningful, well, sometimes it involves another person, and how did they get to be in the right place at the right time if they have free will? And yeah,
Yeah.
it
Well, and the
you
same
get
thing
to
with yeah, am I a robot running through this programmed reality, or am I making the choices that I think I'm making? But if I can't tell the difference, then it doesn't matter. But I want it to matter. You know, I mean, all those questions are huge. And like, are we ensouled creatures? And is that kind of the reality that we're being glimpsed through all of these different things? And then which part of the ancient traditions might be true in regards to that? Like, are we evolving? Are we, you know, do we have subsequent lives to prove some to sort of achieve some kind of growth? Is that infinite? Because that sounds like it might be a hellish reality if we're just kind of doing this over and over and over again.
right.
I mean, there's just so many questions that come along with all this, and it's all so intriguing and, you know,
Yeah, I
fun
mean,
to
if
think
you look
about.
at like in the Sean's story in the book, he
Mm,
has this near death experience where he is, among other things, he's shown this tree, this decision tree, and it looks like an actual like branching structure that each branch point is a decision he made and it leads to different paths, but sometimes those paths reconverge into a similar branch. And so like you know, you think of the video game analogy where, you know, you can't move on unless you go through this one choke point in life. And then you look at, you know, like Frankie, the chapter about someone who has a lifelong experience with the gray aliens. They told Frankie that time doesn't just flow forward and backwards, but it flows in all directions. And so what does that mean? Like,
wow.
what does all directions mean in terms of time? Because I can only really think of forwards and backwards, but maybe that's sort of the parallel realities or probabilities, or uh, you know, you get into these things that make your brain hurt, and it it's good and bad. Like it's like I feel overwhelmed sometimes when I try to put this all together, but also it's endlessly feeding my curiosity.
Yeah. And it makes me feel alive. It's like my imagination can actively be engaged about what the nature of reality is, and that is so liberating and different from when I was, you know, coming out of college and like I'd been handed this materialistic paradigm, and it was like, no, everything is just as it is. We're accidental specks of, you know, biomatter on a rock that's flying around the universe, and none of it means anything. And
Right. Yeah.
just to be given permission to like wonder about it is huge. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on the show and writing your book. Yeah, thank you for reaching out to me, and hopefully we'll have you on again at some point.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, listening to me yammer on about all these crazy stories. And it's really been a journey for me, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.